I just want to give you an update of where I am with the pattern design. So this is the pattern that I'm working with. This of course is the last that I'm working with. You can see that it's originally labeled a size 40, but I have beefed up the back here to make it a size 41. So this is the last that I'm using. Key things that I probably will need you to address for me is around these ball points of your feet. If you can take a measurement of the circumference around, like so, on your feet, on your own feet, just give me the reading of what you get around the ball of your feet. It's important for me to be able to get the accurate sizing. Same around the instep. So you take a reading of the circumference around your feet this way, and just give me that. Now I want to show you, but regardless of not having those measurements, I've just gone ahead to use the dimensions that I have on this last, plus or minus. My wife wears this very same size 41. So I've basically used dimensions that match her more or less, adjusting for a few things here and there. On her own leg, this is the length up until you get just below the knee, which corresponds to the pictures that you sent to me, and you can see that that is about 42 centimeters. In Nigeria we still use the metric measurement, so about 42 cm. So just correspond that on your own leg, and just verify that I guess it should be just roughly around that. So there are two widths along the shaft of this boot. So the top line of the boot, so you need, that is just around the place where beneath your knee you have a mass of muscle there, which is why you see that it's a little bit wider around that place. So for there I'm using a circumference of about 40 cm, and then just before it starts getting big around this area, I'm using a circumference of just about is 16. So 16 times 2, 38, so just about 38 centimeters. So it graduates from 38 all the way up to 40. So that's basically what we have. This line here you find in the middle is where the zipper is going to be. So I have zipper that is long enough to accommodate it. So the zipper starts all the way, so probably going to go all the way beneath the shoe. For the very first one, I'm showing you what I intend to do. This is real leather. This is real leather, so I probably will use this to build this part, all this part that is very close to the ground. And then for this upper part, I'll use faux leather. It's not as strong, it's a synthetic material, but it looks good. It's imitates the qualities and characteristics of leather, fair enough. So this place probably will be real leather. The toughest part that's going to be touching the ground, that's going to be sustaining all of the stress, we'll use real leather for that area. And then probably just to save on cost and stuff, use faux leather for the shaft of the boot. So let me know if all of that is agreeable, and then we'll go forward from here. Thank you. All right, guys, I know this is something that some of you have been looking up to. You want to find out how we pivot this particular pattern and convert. This is like on all the axes. We have the x-axis, we have the y-axis. What is this? So if this is the x-axis and that, you see that this protrudes out of, right? It protrudes out of our center, and that presents us with a problem of how to, just lay it out on a two-dimensional surface. So we have to pivot. Now, there's a very excellent tutorial by a very well-known, well-renowned shoe master known as Marcel Massan on his Instagram. You guys go check it out. He actually discussed quite a number of processes and a number of things that I think everyone who is interested in this craft actually needs to go and see. But beyond everything that he said, there's something he said which is actually very liberating to pattern makers, which is that leather will stretch at least 5% of its original dimension. Now, the ramifications of that statement is very, very liberating for pattern makers, meaning your patterns can tolerate a reasonable amount of error that you really don't have to worry about too much. You don't have to dial it down to a math for it to actually work. The stretch in your leather can actually take care of quite a lot of things that we worry ourselves too much about. So always bear that in mind. But for this, I'll basically, so first thing I want to do is to pivot this. I take a look at the pattern really, and I see that there's a curve here, and then there's another this big gulf here, and then I also have to account for the dimensions of this. So I want this to be on the x-axis, and all of that also on the x-axis. We'll talk about what to do with this curve later, but let's deal with this. So this is probably the point where it breaks off into two curves. One thing I usually do for things like this, which aren't so much, is I mark 1 cm in front of it, 1 cm behind it. Place those 2 points on a straight line, and I can basically do this. Sorry. Draw all the way up to here. Get it back to where we started. So where we started, and we can actually have this like this. So we find that when these 2 points are here, you have accounted for the width. This width is consistent on your x-axis, and this length is also consistent on your x-axis. So now we are here, right? And we want to maintain this length up to here. Remember, this was correct up until this point. So we want to maintain this length up to its proper dimension, while the rest of the width around here remains consistent. So let's say we do this up to this point, which is the curve here. So everything up until this point, yeah, with some slight errors, but look pretty much okay. Now, if we use this place as a pivot point, and this is something that Marcel also talked about, he said you are most likely going to have less problems if you're using the most pronounced point of your angle as your pivot. So if we take this most pronounced point and just pivot this all the way up to the tip right here, immediately we see something happening. All of these parts can actually lie on the x-axis. All of these parts can actually lie on the x-axis, like so. But you now ask yourself, what happens to this point here? So this introduces this big gulf that we have here, and that is where the negative lasting allowance principle comes into play. And how I seek to apply that principle is, up until we come to this point, let's say this point, the distance is not that much, and then maybe up until this point also the distance is not that much. So this is the part where we need to worry too much about, meaning that if I draw an imaginary right angle from here up to here, I can give myself my regular lasting allowance of, let's say, 2 cm up until I get to this point, my lasting allowance up until I get to this point, and then to account for the excess material that we have here, reduce my lasting allowance gradually up until it almost comes to nothing at this point where we have the widest gulf, and then gradually also increase it up until we get to this point where it tapers down again, and then I can increase back to 2 cm of lasting allowance, and that should solve the pivoting problem. So basically what I did is negatived my pivots, negative my lasting allowance at the point where I have the gulf to account for this excess material, and we are good to go. Will this work? I don't know. It appears to be an easy process. This is one of the things that I'm going to prototype at least severally to just satisfy myself that it will in fact work, and I will get back to you at that. So this will probably be what it will look like having pivoted it. One last thing I want to check if the length of this center line corresponds with the length along this line. So if I take a reading from here to, let's say here, up until here for instance, I see I have roughly 24 centimeters. Let's measure this length. So let's call this between here and here, let's roughly call that 6. So that's that point between here and there, plus 3. Between there and here, another 3. Between there and here, another 3. Between there and there, another 3. So that's another 3. And then finally, just about 5. So 3, 3, 3, 3. 3 times 4 is 12 plus 6, that is 18 plus 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13. So whereas we got 24 cm here, we got 23 cm there. I think it's almost to the point. So I guess we're good to go. Just 1 cm apart can always, it could be problems with all of this, stretching that I'm doing with the, I think it's reasonably consistent enough for me to proceed. So I'm going to cut this out in its duplicated state and move it to the post and for 0. One last thing, I always like to point out where my instep is, and if you take a look, my instep is somewhere around here. So I always like to mark that out and use that as a guide when lasting. So I think I will basically just punch in a hole here to give myself a guide for the instep, and that will be it.